you guys out. Good morning, distinguished audience. So I will let you know. Thank you for your presence. This event has been organized by the UNFCCC Secretariat, the Regional Collaboration Center for MENA and South Asia, and the World Bank. My name is Monica Echegoyen, and my role in
اسمي
the
مانيكا
UNFCCC
وأنا
Secretariat is supporting the collaboration with the
أساهم
NDC
في
partnership.
مساعدة الأمم
From that
المتحدة
role,
في
I've
شراكاتها
witnessed
في
the
هذا
crucial role of
الدورة
non-party
ورأيت
stakeholders in
أن
designing, implementing,
كيف
and monitoring
هم
nationally
صاحبو
determined contributions,
المصلحة يقوموا
and reaffirm
بالمساهمة
the need for a
في
participatory and whole-of-society approach moving forward.
المساهمات
We are
للتقدم
here today
للمضي
to
قدما.
explore together how to
نحن
create
هنا
an inclusive and
معا
enhanced civic
كيف
engagement,
نقوم
including
بخلق
children, youth, and other non-party stakeholders in
المساهمات من
developing
جميع
and implementing
الأعمار،
NDCs
ما إذا
in
كانوا
decision
أطفال أو
making
أكبر
and
في
action.
في
Through the program,
اتخاذ
we will share
القرارات.
approaches and good practice
سوف
case studies
نقوم ب
to enhance
بعض
communication and collaboration
لتحسين
between government and non-party stakeholders.
لتحسين الشراكات
It is my
وأيضا
honor
التفاعل
to invite
والتواصل مع
Your Highness Ms. Dr. Mishari Al-Saud,
الجهات
Chairman and
الحكومية، وهو
co-founder of FACIL,
الدكتورة
to give
السعود.
high-level opening remarks.
يسرني تقديمها ولتعطي بعضا من الملاحظات الافتتاحية، كلمة افتتاحية.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
صباح
Good
الخير.
morning, ladies and gentlemen,
صباح
distinguished
الخير
guests,
سيدتي
and
وسادتي،
those visiting the
الضيوف
Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for the first
الأعزاء
time.
والزوار الذين أزاروا المملكة
Welcome to
العربية
a
السعودية
nation
للمرة
renowned
الأولى.
for its
أهلا
history and
بكم
culture,
في
and now
في دولة
leading the
معروفة
transformative action
في
towards a brighter, sustainable future.
تاريخها وأيضا مستقبلها
As we convene on this significant occasion, it's
الواعد.
our honor to host you here in Riyadh,
إنه إلى شرف
where the
لنا
legacy of tradition
أن
seamlessly fuses with modernity
إنه
and
شرف لنا
innovation,
وجودكم في المملكة العربية
and where
السعودية،
our
وهي
unwavering commitment to combating climate
حيث
change is shaping
نحن
our path ahead.
تاريخنا
The Saudi
ما
Vision
زلنا
2030,
نفتخر به،
the
وما
Saudi Green
أيضا
Initiative, and the
نقوم
Middle East Green Initiative. Today, we stand
المستقبل
at a crossroads,
المزدهر،
not
وأيضا
just as a nation,
في
but as global
وننطلق
citizens,
نحو
working in tandem to
السعودية
address one of
الخضراء.
the most pressing
وسنقوم
challenges
بعضا
of
من
our time,
نتكلم عن بعض التحديات التي
climate change.
نواجهها، وهي التغير
In this
المناخي.
endeavor,
إن في
the
هذه
Kingdom of
المعضلة
Saudi Arabia offers
المملكة العربية
more than
السعودية
just words.
قدمت ليس
We
فقط
present
الكلام،
a
ولكنها
blueprint of action
قدمت
from
أيضا
our vast deserts,
مخطط واضح
mountains, and
ل
seas to our vibrant cities and societies.
ما إذا كانت
Groundbreaking
الصحراء أو
initiatives are taking root,
الجبال أو
highlighting our
في
commitment to a
لتغطي
sustainable,
وتعطي
enduring future.
النقاط المهمة التي ممكن
Yet it is essential to
لهذه
recognize the
المبادرات التي
challenges
نقوم
inherent in
بها.
our journey.
نعم،
As an aspiring nation, as an aspiring developing nation, while echoing the sentiment of the broader MENA region, we are navigating a complex landscape. Our
لدينا
developmental
أرض
aspirations are clear.
معقدة، ولكن
Yet,
تخطيطنا
we are
موضح،
acutely
ولكن
aware that merely
نحن نعرف
relying on
أن
past strategies is insufficient.
نحن نعرف أن
We are
إذا
forging
اعتمدنا
new
على
paths,
الخطط القديمة التي قدمناها لن يكون كافٍ، ولكن نود أن نقوم بخطوات قد تلهم بعضا من الدول الأخرى،
drawing together governments, non-party
تكون
stakeholders, and importantly integrating the wider society.
الأهم
That's
هي
the very
جمع
essence of our gathering here in Riyadh for the MENA Climate Week.
القطاعات
We
الحكومية
are here
أن
to
تعمل مع
collaboratively
أصحاب المصلحة
confront these
وغير
challenges,
الأطراف،
inspire
أن
new ideas,
يعملون
and
أيضا
chart a
ليلهموا بعضا
sustainable
من
course for all.
الأفكار الجديدة،
Our
وأيضا
discussions today centered on whole
وضع
of society's
مبادرات
approach to transformation,
فعالة،
aim to
ونحن
amplify the importance of an
نقوم
inclusive
في
approach,
ما هي
one that
الطرق أو
instills a
منهجية
deep
أو
sense of ownership. This sentiment is crucial as we tackle the
الطريقة التي
enormity
سنقوم
of
بها في
climate change.
تغيير أو التحول.
We strive
نحن
towards the
كجماعة
ambitious goals
نحن
laid
نتقدم إلى
out in the Saudi Green
الأهداف
Initiative and Middle East Green Initiative, and as well the Paris Agreement.
الأهداف الطموحة،
let's be
ولكن
Our path forward is characterized by continuous adaptation and learning. It's not just
طريقنا
about
يعتمد
understanding the
على
NDC and its targets, but
التعلم
also the active participation in their formation.
والمشاركة
A practical,
والعلم
hands-on approach. In today's dialogue, enriched by the esteemed community representatives and experts,
والآن
the upcoming panel discussions on
سنتحدث مع بعض
voices
الخبراء في
from
هذه
the
الجلسة
region and the next round of
القادمة
NDCs.
من
We will not only share and exchange knowledge on how to refine our climate pledges, but
العملية
as well seek
ولكن
guidance
أيضا
from you, from
نود
everybody
أن
to propel
تعطونا
us
من بعض
to the desired
النصائح
direction.
أو
Thank you
أن
very much.
تقودوا في بعض المجالات وممكن أن نستفيد منها.
Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا.
I would like now to invite Mr. James Graver,
أود
Mitigation
أن
Director of the
أدعو
UNFCCC Secretariat, to give us some opening
الأستاذ
remarks.
جيف ليعطي بعض من الملاحظات الافتتاحية.
Your Highness, distinguished participants, thank you all for joining us
الحضور
today
الأعزاء
in the Track
شكرا
4
لكم
event on
لوجودكم
whole
اليوم
of society's approaches to transformation,
واللي
non-party
أتحدث عن
stakeholders' role in implementing
التحول
NDCs in the MENA region.
في جميع
This event is organized by the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center for MENA and South Asia and the World
هذا
Bank. I want to start by saying that the first Global
وجودنا
Stocktake
في هذا المؤتمر
COP28
الذي
is likely
قد
to reveal
تقدمه
what we already know.
الأمم
The climate
المتحدة
pledges and their implementation
وخاصة في
critically
منطقة
lag behind
الشرق
what is
الأوسط
needed for
وشمال
limiting
أفريقيا.
warming to 1.5 degrees.
فنحن ووجود أيضا
The
البنك
NDC synthesis report released in October of
العالمي
2022 indicated that if implemented fully, current NDCs will by
فنحن
2030
لدينا
achieve
بعض
only
من
a
ال
0.3% reduction
NDCs
below
قد
2019 levels,
أصبحت
which is only a fraction of what is required.
32%
To further ambition and implementation,
قد
party and non-party
انخفضت
stakeholders such as the private sector, civil society, youth,
فدائما تنفيذ هذه المساهمات ما إذا كانت من دول أصحاب المصلحة أو من غير الأطراف أو
by 2025.
فهذه المساهمات المحددة وطنيا هي نقيس فيها
can be made mutually supportive through whole of society approaches and integrated
مساهمة ومساعدة
in that regard. This session
اتخاذ القرارات
aims to bring together government representatives
وأيضا
and non-party
جمع
stakeholders.
الدوائر الحكومية والتعاون بينهم وهدفها هو وضع أصحاب المصلحة وهذه طريقة أصحاب المصلحة هي الطريقة التي نفهم فيها أن ليس فقط شخص واحد ولكن أيضا أو منشأة واحدة لكن نود جماعة أو مجموعة أكبر من
The Secretary is and will continue to facilitate this process to collectively
القطاعات
achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement.
لأيضا نحقق أهداف اتفاقية باريس اللي أيضا لإعطاء الحلول لتغير المناخ. أشكركم.
Thank you very much, James.
شكرا لك جيمس.
Let us now open the floor to the first panel.
دعونا نبدأ في الجلسة الحوارية.
On something that I want to show you.
أو سوف أريكم شيئا.
On participatory approaches to NDC design and implementation. Let me invite to join the stage
دعوني أدعو
again Your Highness Dr. Mishrahi Al Saud, please.
السيد
Haya Asir, Global Council on SDG 13, Climate Action Youth Representative.
وأيضا ممثلون من هذه الشركة.
Leon Diaz Bonet, Chief Secretary General's Office from ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. And to like this discussion, I would like us to welcome Rafif Abdel Razak, Program Leader for Sustainable Development from the World Bank.
من البنك العالمي.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining
us.
As our opening speakers highlighted, we're here to discuss all the different whole of society approaches we can take to address the NDCs. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with the NDCs, we have a lot of youth and a lot of different people attending Climate Week. Let's just step back a bit and highlight that an NDC is a climate action plan to cut emissions and adapt climate impacts. And it's clear from what we've been hearing, what we're seeing, and the current state of the world that it can't be done from just one side. So I'm very excited to have these panelists with us to highlight how it can be done from both civil society, youth, as well as from the perspective of cities.
من وجهة نظر المجتمع ومن وجهة نظر الجيل الجديد ونتحدث مع المؤسس فاسيل والأنسة هيا
and Mr. Leon Diaz-Bone, Chief Secretary General's Office, ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. So I will start with the same question for everyone, but I'd like them to give it to us, to give us share their perspectives from their respective areas of expertise. So I'll start with you, Dr. Mashari. What are the current challenges and best practices you've seen in ensuring a whole society approach to designing and implementing NDCs in the MENA region, and from the perspective of civil society and your organization?
الوطنية أو المساهمات المحددة.
Thank you very much, Rafif.
أشكرك يا رفيق على هذه المقدمة دعيني أعطي نبذة عن منظمتنا وهي فاسيل. فاسيل هي منظمة غير ربحية وهي تعمل نحو البيئة المستدامة وهي في نقاط معينة هي الوعي وأيضا تعزيز المعرفة.
With regards to our perspective,
عندما نتحدث
as a civil society organization representing the community
في هذا المجتمع
shaping the NDCs from a community perspective, we actually are capitalizing on the impactful networking element of that.
غالبا هذه الشبكات التي النقاط التي ذكرتها تؤثر على ما إذا كانت الحلول التي قدمناها من خلال الإجراءات أو ولكن في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا هنالك بعض الفرص التي ممكن نستخدمها كمنصات كمثل القوي وإنفاسيل كنا نحن شركاء في تقديم هذه الإجراءات عندما نقوم بجذب هذه المجتمعات ومشاركتهم في هذه لأنهم غالبا لا يسمع لهم ولا يسمع لنا، لذا نحن كان هذا وعدنا أن يكون لهم صوت في هذه المنطقة. لقد بدأت من سنوات ثم
UN agencies
من
like Fasil being a UNEP accredited NGO. This gave us an access to a huge network of intergovernmental agencies
شبكات كبرى حول العالم وخاصة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا، ونحن نتعاون مع مع الإمارات والأردن ومصر ونحن نعطي بعض الفرص.
So these are some of the opportunities, yet there are some challenges. The challenges
التحديات هي
are at different levels. There are
في مستويات مختلفة. هنالك بعض من التحديات التنظيمية وأيضا ما إذا كنا نستطيع وضع خلق التغيير ولكن أيضا هنالك بعض من التحديات التي في حوكمة القطاع الثالث، ولكن هذه تعتبر خطوات لابد لنا التقدم بها. وهنالك تحديات إذا كانت هي الكفاءات. نحن أحيانا لسنا
and third challenge relates to
أن نكون بشكل معقول أو موثوق. التوثيق هو أن نكون منصة موثوقة لتوصيل أصواتنا لتسمع من العالم. وما إذا كانت في الأمم المتحدة هنالك منظمات حكومية داخلية تعمل معنا في وتنظم من يعمل معنا ومن ينظم معنا. وآخر نقطة هي المساهمات، وهي خدمات التي في هذه المناطق. نحن لقد حصلنا على الكثير من التغيرات فيما يتعلق خاصة في أندية الجامعات، فهي تساهم بشكل كبير في وجود للوصول للمجتمعات. وهذه النقطة شكرا إن قد أعطيتنا أمثلة رائعة من المملكة التي ممكن نستخدمها في المناطق جميعا كلها. وأيضا لقد تكلمت عن التواصل وأيضا المشاركة مع الإمارات، وأيضا المشاركة مع الجيل الجديد. هل يمكن أن تعطينا ما هي أفضل الممارسات للحصول التواصل مع هذه المجالات؟ أشكركم. أنا لنعود قليلا، أنا أود أن أعطي نبذة عن المنطقة والجيل الجديد أو الشباب. فالعمر المتوسط في منطقة الشرق الأوسط والشمال أفريقيا هو 22. فنحن في شبابنا نعتبر أصغر فئة أو أصغر منطقة في العالم كله. فنحن إذا لم نعطيهم المجال في المنصة لصناعة القرار فنحن قد نفشل. لا بد من إعطائهم المجال. أود أن أعطي بعض من الأمثلة من أفضل الممارسات التي رأيتها في الأمم المتحدة، ولربما أسهب القليل. تحدثت عن تخصصت خاصة في تغيرات المناخ وأيضا التنمية. لقد قالوا لي أنهم سنعطي آخر تحديث في الأمم المتحدة. أنا لست
the needed NDAs to be a part of that working group, but I was invited to the kitchen, not only to the party, but to dance
ليس فقط
party. So this is the first approach by which
هذه أول طريقة التي توقعت أن هذه أول مثال وجدت فيه أن ضم الشباب أو ضم الجيل الجديد جدا مهم وأيضا مفيد لهذه المبادرات لتغير المناخ. في تغير المناخ ما إذا كانت
to make things work with different stakeholders, and things with youth-led initiatives, it gets really, really tricky and hard. But to my surprise, if you go
فإذا
to
كانت
the second
سهم أو
update, sorry,
تطوعية
the third update
فهذا
of the
يعتبر
second NDC of
وننتقل
the
الآن
UAE, you'll find a
للتحديث
whole
الآخر
chapter,
هو
paragraph in
قد
essence,
وجدت
about the Arabic Youth Council for Climate Change.
ممكن أن تجدوا
And this does two things to me as a
مقال
young person
كامل
who's trying
عن
to support. The
تغير
first is
المناخ
it
في
makes me feel
منطقة
like
الشرق الأوسط
my
وشمال
initiative and my
أفريقيا
work is seen,
فأنا
it's taken seriously,
جدا مهم
and it's
بالنسبة لي أن
actually
تكون مبادرتي
recognized by the
وأيضا
government.
عملي
And the
أن
second
يكون
thing is it
موثقا
reinforces
وأن
and
يكون
reassures me that all
واضحا
these efforts are
خاصة
actually
للقطاعات
contributing to the
الحكومية
larger
وأن
efforts of
هذه
the country
الجهود
itself.
هي
So I am not a
تسهم في
standalone initiative. I'm not
مساعدة
doing things out of
الدولة
vacuum, but yet I am
والمنطقة
contributing to the
فأنا
future of the country,
أود
and that
أن
motivates
أساهم في
motivates me to work harder.
مستقبل
So these are two ways by which,
المنطقة
or
فهذا
best practices by which I
جدا
myself was involved in the
يعطيني
draft and
تشجيعا
reviewal of
لأعمل بشكل أكبر
the UAE's NDC. But this is
فالعمل
not only
مع
in the UAE. There are many
الإمارات ليس
examples
فقط في
in the MENA
الإمارات
region where youth were
ولكن
involved. For example,
هناك
there's
العديد من المناطق
an
التي
initiative
يكون
that was
فيها
led UAE, Jordan,
الشباب
and Qatar, where they involved
يشاركون
youth in
في
a workshop to
صناعة
develop
القرار
their national
وأيضا
adaptation plans.
هنالك بعض من
So these are not costly. It just
الدول
requires that
تقوم
we try to institutionalize
ورشات
these kind of
عمل
workshops and of
مخصصة
consultations. Maybe we can address that later. To tap into the
الشباب
challenges, I know I took a lot of time too, but to tap into the challenges, I think Your Highness mentioned something that's very important, which is credibility, especially when it comes from youth. I know we don't have much expertise, but still, we are the future, we're the leaders of the future, and we're trying as much as possible to be up to date
قادة
with everything and be
المستقبل
educated. So we
فنود
do
أن
not
نكون
just miss on that
لابد أن
because of
يكون
lack of
لدينا
credibility.
العلم لا نود أن يكون
Lack of platforms too.
لا نود أن
initiatives
لا
and there
يسمعنا
are
صوتنا
efforts,
ليس
but
لدينا
there
منصة
has to be institutionalized
وهنالك
platforms
أعلم
where
أن
youth
هنالك
are able to contribute seriously.
كثير من المبادرات ولكن لابد أن يكون هناك منصة موحدة ليسمع صوتنا.
Sometimes we don't see
شكرا
there are avenues for
جزيلا.
youth to come in, and we need to keep that and be very vigilant. And unfortunately, I can't associate with the youth anymore, but I can associate with cities as an urban planner. So I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Leon to give us the perspective from the cities and how cities there are avenues and challenges as well as challenges for bringing a whole of society approach to
المدن
NDCs.
كيف هي تساهم في المساعدة.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I couldn't hear
هل
myself.
تسمعني؟
You can hear me, that's okay. Thank you very much.
شكرا
Keith,
جزيلا
and,
لك.
it's interesting to be on this panel because, of course, on this UN logic, cities are non-party stakeholders, but essentially they're still forms of government. So that maybe distinguishes the constituency I'm representing on this panel to the constituencies that my two previous speakers were referring to, because, they are governments, but they are not the national government. I think
هم حكومة ولكنهم ليسوا حكومة قومية فهذه هي النقطة التي أود أن أتحدث عنها.
Local Governments for Sustainability is a global network of more than 2,500 cities and regions that are all committed to sustainable urban development, and we're active in more than 125 countries, including some
أكثر
in
من
the
500
region,
دولة.
maybe than in other geographies. In the UNFCCC process, we
ففي
act as the
الأمم
focal point
المتحدة
of the local governments and municipal authorities
الحكومة
where
المحلية
as a big group of I think around 30 partners with other city
مجموعة
networks and
من
other urban
30
and subnational stakeholders. We're trying to really advocate for the principle of multi-level governance to ensure that
لنتأكد أن يكون هنالك عمل لتغير المناخ والعمل للصد على هذا التحدي للمستوى الذي نريده ونريد أن تطبيقه. نحن نحاول أن نعمل في للمساهمة بمساعدة هذه المقاومات أو المركبات التي نحتاجها المكونات التي المطلوبة نحن نعلم أنهم الشباب هم أقرب شيء للمواطنون وهم نعلم أنهم لابد أن يكونون جزءا من هذه التخطيط بالتخطيط في هذه المناطق. لقد طلبت منها أن نتحدث أكثر عن منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا، ونعرف أن هنالك 6 دول في هذه المنطقة. وأيضا لكن عندما ترون نحن عندما نرى هذه المساهمات المحددة وطنيا التي قدمت هي تقريبا 22 صفحة النسخة التي رأيتها باللغة الإنجليزية، وتعطي أمثلة مثلا عن في الإمارات هنالك سياسات إماراتية الذي نتقدم فيه في هذه المساهمات المحددة ونحاول في مصر والأردن وأيضا السعودية والتقديم السعودي أيضا هم يطبقون هذه المساهمات والكفاءات كجزء منها ويزداد طموحهم. نرى في الرياض نحن نرى كيف تغيرت في قليلا من الأشهر، فقط في بضع أشهر قد تغيرت. أنا أتكلم معظما عن ليس فقط نحن نطلب من الحكومة فقط أن تنظم هذه المساهمات، ولكن نود أن تكون مدمجة وأيضا تعطي
for example, in Japan, where there have been hundreds of cities that have unilaterally taken action and declaring an ambitious climate action target, and that has informed the national government, and without much effort, the national government could actually increase the ambition at the national level. So we're hoping that this is a two-way street, that not only national plans kind of need to be implemented at the local level, but that the local level can actually inform the national NDC. I think I come to a stop here because we have more questions coming up.
I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on some of the challenges you think, if you see any specifically in MENA.
I think the challenges could be that, I mean, it's very heterogeneous. So in some contexts, I think we would just be very happy to see the uptake of urban components in the NDCs. But for other contexts, it's a bit more nuanced. I think some of the NDCs that have a good focus on urban components, they tend to focus then on the big cities, the capitals of the world, which admittedly they have a large footprint, and it's a key ground to address them. But I think what we would wish to see is that also the smaller and medium-sized cities find with more consideration. There's some NDCs, like the one from Jordan, that is already kind of considerate of this, but other NDCs in the region, maybe we would maybe like to see more consideration of the small and medium-sized cities.
I think you've all highlighted similar challenges where we just need to hopefully ensure that national governments and governments are bringing in and creating avenues and platforms for all the different stakeholders to come in, and not just maybe the leading ones. Okay, My next question for everyone is sticking to the region. So what are your regional considerations that need to be taken into account to define and adopt a whole of society approach for the next round of the NDCs? And you've already highlighted on some of that, that these avenues need to be created. But what other potential interventions you see, whether it's within the economy or is it technical capacity or financial considerations that would enable more involvement in the next round? Dr. Mashadi, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much. Well, all of the above plus some other.
We'd love to hear more.
But I would, I mean, the involvement of the community is still not well represented. There are more needs to be happening, and it's a two-way kind of thing. There is a responsibility for the community to come forward and to actually bring their voice, because sometimes it's easy to blame institutions. It's easy to note that there are lack of platforms, but sometimes the platform are triggered and created by the community themselves. So I've been sitting. I went around some private sector, government as well, and believe me, some people when they are working day on day, busy doing their work, sometimes they tend to deviate from more comprehensive approach. So we need more of a collective approach into this. The community should come forward. Governmental agencies and other players in the private sector and intergovernmental entities should open their doors to allow for the creation of platforms and provide also opportunities for enablement, whether it's technical, financial, and so on. And the example Haya mentioned with regards to being involved in such working groups and bringing your voice, the community's voice in that as well is a great example. But again, maybe I'll take a step back and reflect on something that is a bit related to this question, which is a proper representation of the community's need. Sometimes we tend to look into the, for example, environmental impact or the climate the dimension of it, but tend to forget the economic and social parameters of this holistic approach. And this is where the community should come forward and present. And being in Saudi Arabia, a country that might have been blamed for some blames with regards to the contribution to the climate. However, this is the things that the government and the community have collaborate on with new approaches and innovative initiatives that tackles the climate challenges in a more progressive way without hindering economic advantages that the country is standing on, but at the same time providing more of a holistic approach that stands on innovation, on creative initiatives to solve these challenges. I hope I reflected to your question appropriately.
Sure. So I think we put a lot of emphasis and pressure on governments to provide platforms and provide areas where non-party stakeholders can contribute. But there also, we should also put effort and pressure on the non-party stakeholders to involve themselves. So allow me to tackle both. I'm going to give a few examples on top-down approaches that we can work together on, or bottom-up approaches that non-party stakeholders should work on themselves. So to start with the top-down approaches, I think the example I mentioned on consultations and engagements is very important, and it cannot be randomized. It has to be institutionalized in the drafting and designing of the NDC itself. and to include all various groups under the larger title of non-party stakeholders. The second one is, and just because I'm biased to youth, I'm mentioning this, we cannot always involve youth with an observer badge or a tokenized badge. How can we increase youth representations not as observer or non-party delegate, but actually as a party delegate? How can we involve their voices in the actual delegations that are representing our countries? The third point I would like to mention from the top-down approach is I would kindly ask governments to do a stakeholder mapping exercise and find what are the youth-led initiatives in their countries that are actually contributing to their NDCs. Marginalizing these efforts is a waste or a lose-lose scenario where the youth are not getting the recognition and the country is not benefiting from these initiatives and projects that are being conducted. So these are the three points from a top-down approach. If we look at the other approach, which is a more bottom-up approach, I would like to urge non-party stakeholders to first do their own advocacy plans. If you want your voices to be heard, they have to be aligned, they have to be formalized, they have to be formed in the universal language of policy recommendations, of advocacy plans. And I know this is very new to our region, but not in the format that is localized. So we do have our own forms of advocacy plans, of recommendations that are being drafted by youth and other non-party stakeholders. The second point is I would urge youth to share knowledge. I would urge civil society groups to share their knowledge. You mentioned raising awareness. I think this is very important and it would be more beneficial if we don't wait for the governments to actually create these educational plans or awareness-raising plans, but do our share of the knowledge sharing part. And the third point I would like to mention is participation in these dialogues. Let's say
نشر هذه المعلومات ولا يعتمد فقط على الحكومة ونظام التعليم.
It would be very unfortunate if the governments are putting down their share of the work
أن يكون فقط الحكومة التي تقوم
بعملها
بعملها ولا يقوم المجتمعات المدنية بالقيام بأدوارهم وعملهم. فهذه مساهمات أو طرق مختلفة وممكن تطبيقها. أشكرك لقد أعطيتنا هذه الواجبات التي ممكن أن نعمل بها.
Leon, why don't you give us your perspective on regional considerations for improving the whole
أعطني بعضا من نظرة عن برأيك عن هذا الموضوع.
And we, as ICLE, we have a partnership with Jungo.
نحن لدينا
مشاركة مع very specific initiative for this. So you're all aware the Global Stocktake is ongoing, and that's an exercise that's at the national level, but we're actively incentivizing municipalities all around the world to conduct local stocktake exercises in their own city halls, where they really bring together the citizens and different key stakeholder groups, including the youth, for a joint exercise of really taking stock, where are we, where do we want to go, how do we get there. So a very kind of participatory approach, and we're partnering with Jungo to integrate that with the ELCOIs that were mentioned by His Highness, and also to encourage sorry, I lost my thought. To encourage kind of these local stock takes to inform then the national exercises and also the formulation of national ambitions. Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yes, so we're looking for, in the next round, what different considerations. So I think you echoed very well what Haya was saying about stock taking and a stakeholder mapping type of exercise. Anything else you see that you would like to see in the next round, whether it's capacity building or financial considerations?
I think it's a bit what I said in my earlier statement about the inclusion of more urban actions in the NDCs, also when it comes to small and medium-sized cities. And I think one challenge and why that's potentially not included yet is that, of course, the large BRT project in Amman, the metro in Riyadh, the metro in Cairo, they're all large-scale infrastructure projects that you can actually quite easily include in your section on means of implementation, because it's easy to put a cost at that because it's a very large project, it's economically interesting. You can very well quantify the needs in terms of capacity and financial resources. And small and medium-sized cities do not necessarily have that. They normally have ideas, very good and concrete ideas of what it is that they need to advance with their own climate action in their jurisdiction, but they sometimes don't have among their staff the necessary technical capacity on how to formulate that into a very concrete project. Or the projects have very small volumes and they need to kind of be aggregated to be financially interesting for a financing institution to take it up. And that's something we're also trying to support national governments with, to build capacity in local in municipalities with staff to really elevate projects from the idea to the bankability stage. There's a lot of these project pipelines, project preparation facilities around. And maybe that is something that we can strive to include in the upcoming NDCs.
Well, I have many more questions, but I'd like to see if maybe the audience would like to come in, if there's any questions. Maybe you weren't prepared to ask questions, but this is your chance. I see a hand raised. I don't know if we have a mic we can share. Maybe. Where's our sound person? I see the mic coming over to you.
Very much. Okay, thank you very much for the participation approach that you designed when you implemented the NDC approach. But our MENA region is suffering from the lack of the participation of the citizens, especially when we speak or need to discuss the environmental issues. Most of the practical and experience of the community participation approach come ready under the project, especially the projects come from the EU funded or UNEP or somewhere. So, and most of the, my question is for Dr. Mashari as a civil society co-founder and chairman of the organization Fasil. Do you have designed approach specific for the community and the local community in Saudi Arabia, or you work with the familiar approach that we already work with in Libya, for example, because I'm from Libya, for a community meeting, something like that, or platform. Do you have a local approach you implemented because we familiar with some issues, we familiar with some habitats and the cultures?
Thank you very much for your question. And is this your first time in Saudi or? حياك الله. Well, for us, yeah, it's a very important question, and you mentioned something about there is a lack for the civil society engagement in designing and shaping international policies that reflects to their own interest. Well, when we started in Fasil, we started to look at the social structure. We started to analyze what are the most appropriate channels to reach out to the community and to have the best feedback from the community, but as well the appropriate methods to reach out to governmental entities. And that analysis took some time for us to engage. But we were privileged. This is a hard word that I always struggle to say. We're privileged that one time a government entity approached us seeking our input when they went to, for example, some international policy design forum, where they found the huge influence of NGOs in that forum. So they said, will you be able to actively engage? And that was on a specific treaty that we were working on. So that was our first kickstart engagement when it comes to international policy design. We've established a forum, an open channel, both virtual and physical, for the community to engage. We were reaching out to different community segments, university students, even to some scholars, Islamic scholars, where they can convey some of the messages in, for example, Jum'ah prayers and so on. And that's the element when I said we need to understand the social structure and the trust hierarchy of each community segment. Saudi Arabia is a very diverse country with many cities and many social cultures within Saudi Arabia. We had to analyze the most appropriate way to reach out to that community segment. And then we started to have more of a dominoes effect. You know, when people started to realize what is Fasil, we started to build a little bit of credibility. And then we were engaging with channels that allow for civil society organization engagement. We went, for example, to the G20 process. Saudi Arabia is a G20 country. There is a G20 process, and there are the engagement groups with the G20. There is a specific group called the Civil 20, and we were part of that as well in the Climate, Energy, and Sustainability Working Group, drafting and pushing for some recommendations, taking the input from the whole society as much as we could. Definitely, there is limits, but we aggregated this collective view on certain issues, and we've advocated for it, communicated it to the process. We presented about 20 policy recommendations. 11 of them were adopted as is by word in the C20 policy pack that was endorsed by the G20, reflecting our needs, our local needs. When I'm talking about our, I mean about the region's needs, because we share similar requirement of economic developmental needs and so on. Sorry, I took a little bit long reflecting to this question, but I hope I answered it.
Really very interesting points, and I'd like to emphasize again your analysis or your suggestion to understand all the different segments of society and then the best way to reach them. Haya, maybe you can say a bit about what you've seen has worked well on how to engage you. I mean, maybe sometimes we're outdated. Should we be using Snapchat or TikTok? What's the best approach that you've seen to bring in youth to this discussion?
ChatGPT. So first of all, what are the best practices in bringing youth is understanding the needs of youth. This is the first part, and understanding the importance of youth involvement. If we are using that, or if it's not only for youth, but for any other non-party stakeholders, it's not a tokenism move. It should be an actual involvement and an actual taking their opinions and their voices into consideration. I want to mention maybe an example of what we are doing on the road to COP28, and that is making sure that the youth are leading. When I mentioned earlier that we should not wait, we should lead, and this is something that we're doing with the Conference of Youth COI. That's leading up to COP28. So a lot of you maybe have heard of COP, but not of COI. And COI is the Conference of Youth that precedes COP every single year for the past 18 iterations. And it's hosted usually in the same country that hosts COP. The main outcome of COI itself is the Global Youth Statement. And the Global Youth Statement is a policy recommendation paper, and it capitalizes on voices from youth from more than 110 countries all over the world. So this is a huge scope of work, and it took thousands of volunteering working hours from youth from different parts of the globe to come together and compile this policy recommendation paper. Because youth do understand that if they want to be heard, then they have to submit something that speaks the same language as the decision makers. So this is part of what we are doing as youth to make sure that we are represented well, and we are we are contributing to the decision-making table. And allow me to take this chance to ask all the parties or stakeholders or private sector or public sector or non-governmentals or non-profits to make sure to try to support these youth-led initiatives, whether it's the Global COI that's going to take place on November 26th, 7th, and 8th in Dubai, or if it's the regional our COIs, or if they are the local COIs that are happening in each one of the countries. Try to reach out and find these youth-led initiatives because they do need the support.
Leon, maybe if you have seen from the municipal side recommendations or best practices that at the city level or at the town level even that can bring in participation from the community.
Yeah, I mean, there's different formats, but I think generally it's really important to leverage the insights of the residents, because I mean, you and I understand we're the urban planners on this panel, so maybe we have some fancy concepts that we can throw around, and depending on the design background, we can even make some fancy renderings of how the city of the future might look like. I can't do that. I don't know if you have those skills, but each of us who lives in cities, we're like local experts. We know our district, we know our neighborhood, we know the people that make it up, and these are like form part of the infrastructure of cities. So it's critical that each major project is kind of discussed with the residents of the neighborhood, and that can include also then the different perspectives, be it a youth who might need to ask, like, how can I spend my free time on this, or someone who just has to go about their daily lives, doing care work, doing groceries, going to work, all these things, and it really depends on the project, but I think it's key that you communicate extremely well what you want to achieve as a municipal government with a certain intervention, how you're going to go about it, how you can design it. There are some municipalities also like to work with pilot projects where they say, like, look, we want to test together with you as a community a certain measure, but it's going to have first a limited duration, so that you can all kind of adapt to it, see how you feel, provide us with feedback, and in some cases they even have very hard KPIs that are kind of communicated in advance, that the success of this pilot project is then measured against, so that at the end of the day, it's not, again, a political decision, but it's really like, look, we closed down one lane of traffic and we wanted to open it for bicycles, and we say in advance, if the traffic with the cars is not more than 5 minutes delayed in the same period 1 year after, then we are going to make it permanent. And I think that's a very clear communication, because it kind of tries to take out all the sentiments of like, oh, but I need my car and I need to drive with it on this road, and the fears, am I still going to be able to get where I need to go in time? Like some of these, like very good communication, ensuring it's on all platforms. Yeah, that's kind of some of the approaches.
Great, thank you. And I think it links back to what Dr. Mashari was saying about knowing your community and knowing all the different segments and how to reach them. So we have basically a minute left, and I just want to see if there's any last thoughts any of our panelists would like to share, whether it's in the run-up to COP28, as Haya already highlighted, but of really where we want to see the NDCs going. Anything you'd like to add?
We've heard your name in the middle, so that's why.
She started the discussion on to COP, so maybe we should see if there's anything you'd like to see in the run-up to COP.
Maybe last thing I would mention, and this is something that I've already highlighted, but just to reiterate, in Arabic we have a proverb that says اليد الواحدة لا تصفق, which translates into one hand cannot clap by itself. So I think in the lead up to not only COP28, but all the COPs that are to come, we should make sure to put hands in hands together with whether it's non-party stakeholders, whether it's governments or any other, I don't know if there's any other non-party or party, that's it. Just to conclude, make sure that you are capitalizing on these partnerships and on these alliances for the greater good.
Any last thoughts?
You?
Well, my last thoughts are a transition to the next panel, so I don't know if you want to take the stage first.
Well, again, reiterating on like the points that Haya mentioned, and again, reflecting on the that there are two approaches, bottom-up and top-down approaches. Again, I think we're fully aligned. Know your community. Sometimes it's your responsibility to establish the process. Sometimes you have to educate the governmental or the counterparts for these establishing these specific platforms or opportunities for better engagement and more social representation.
Great, thank you so much. A round of applause for our panelists today, Dr. Mashadi, Ms. Haya, and Leon. And we look forward to the next panel.
Thanks to you, Rafi.
Thank you very much. Thank you, audience, for staying with us. We have another panel now on a very crucial topic. So if you feel like stretching, please feel free to stand up, but don't leave the room. So after this very enlightening and inspiring panel, I will now give the time for our next panel of speakers. We're going to talk about a crucial topic on next round of NDCs, guidance for non-party stakeholders. So I will kindly ask to welcome us to join us here in the stage, Ms. Jennifer Kinney-Austin, Director of Policy and Strategy Climate Champion STEM. Thank you, Jennifer. And Leah Ranalder from UN Habitat. And we also have two more speakers virtually. We have Harika Masood from the World Bank and Jasmine Blessing from the UNDP. And to moderate this session and last part of our program, I invite Mary Awad Menasa, Senior Climate Action Specialist at the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center for MENA and South Asia. Mary, back to you.
Thank you, Monica. I hope you can hear me. Thanks, everyone. And I would like to start first by thanking the first panel for excellent interventions and really setting the stage for this conversation. I just want to highlight maybe a few observations from this discussion. There's a lot of, it seems, horizontal and vertical elements to non-party stakeholder engagement in NDCs. Looking at it from government down to non-party stakeholder, but also everybody mentioned this bottom-up approach, voicing concerns, voicing priorities. But what I also noticed is that the same non-party stakeholder groups in different countries in the MENA regions are talking to each other. The private sector across the region is mobilizing and learning from each other, as well as youth, as we have seen, and I think that's a very encouraging point. So this panel, which focuses on guidances for non-party stakeholders, is not only for non-party stakeholders, but also for governments to consult and to understand how institutional arrangements and how best practices can enhance their non-party stakeholders in their different countries to engage in the NDC process. So we have a very distinguished panel here with us today from UNDP, UN Habitat, the World Bank, and the Climate Champions. And I would like to first give the floor to Jasmine to give us a few insights on how can gender be mainstream in NDC and what does that mean for the different non-party stakeholder groups, but also the different governments. Jasmine, if you can hear me, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I have prepared a PowerPoint, so just wanted to kindly ask to pull up the presentation if possible.
Sure, I think that we need to switch to the presentation again. If we can please switch. Thank you. Yes, perfect. Please go ahead, Jasmine.
Perfect. Thank you so much. If you could go to the second slide, that would be great. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I would like to start with a little bit of background. I'm going to share some good practices in ensuring a gender approach in NDC as part of the Climate Promise program. And in case that you're not familiar with the program the Climate Promise is actually the largest offer of support for countries to enhance NDCs under the Paris Agreement. And currently it's active in 127 countries and helps countries to reduce emissions and increase resilience. And in the MENA region, Climate Promise currently supports 7 countries. And really importantly, gender integration is a key element for all countries that have projects under the Climate Promise. Next slide, please.
الشريحة الأخرى.
The one before, if possible. Thank you, perfect. So as you can see on the slide, there has been a positive increase with regards to gender integration in many of the key areas when you compare the first round of NDCs with the second one. And 95% of countries that have submitted the updated NDC have included references to women's empowerment and gender equality compared to 46% in the first round. And we also see a sharp increase of countries mentioning women at the sectoral level as compared to the first round. Next slide, please. And in the MENA region, we can also see that enhanced NDCs are actually more inclusive than in the first round. So we've seen some positive signs of change. For example, Iraq's NDC mentions supporting rural women through the use of modern technologies. Jordan's NDC recommends strengthening the role of women in renewable energies. And Tunisia's NDC emphasizes women's access to training and skills. Lastly, Somalia's NDC highlights that women can also be agents of change and play a key role in mitigation. And also really important to say that UNDP promoted that gender and displacement will be included in Somalia's updated NDC. Next slide, please. So now a quick snapshot of 3 countries in the MENA region. In Lebanon, a UNDP partnered with the Ministry of Environment to enhance gender responsiveness in Lebanon's NDC. And a gender analysis revealed women's not only limited participation in decision-making and consultations. So since then, the Lebanese government has committed to ensure a gender approach in NDCs in future updates. And really a great achievement has been that the National Council of Lebanese Women now sits on the National Committee overseeing NDC implementation and approvals. Next slide, please. And in Jordan, we are currently collaborating with the Ministry of Environment, specifically focusing on making the transport sector greener and more inclusive for women and for people with disabilities. And so while we've been assessing opportunities for both for women and for youth, we have identified significant potential in the transport sector for job creation, particularly for women. So our project is enhancing technical skills and providing them with green jobs. Next slide, please. And in Somalia and Sudan, Climate Promise initiatives have been significantly assisting with the respective governments, often led by the Ministry of Environment, ensuring the active participation of women and also of displaced women in NDC consultations and updates. Next slide, please. So now, despite the good practices we've just seen, I wanted to say that there's still some challenges when it comes to integrating gender into climate action. So one big issue is the lack of gender-specific data on climate impacts. And without its data, it's really hard to address gender-specific needs in our climate plans. Secondly, many countries don't have the know-how how to integrate gender into their climate policies, missing out on the potential of women in climate action. Third, gender inequalities in decision-making often still exclude women's perspectives in climate policies. And often there's simply not enough funds allocated for gender-responsive climate action, which can slow down progress. And lastly, like proper systems for tracking gender integration progress are often underdeveloped. Next slide, please.
الشريحة الأخرى.
So, based on our experience in the region, we at UNDP believe that we should focus on different key strategies to kind of more impactfully integrate gender in the third round of NDCs. So, firstly, actively involving civil society, especially women's groups in NDC development, implementation, and monitoring. Also, really important to collect and analyze gender disaggregated data on climate impact, to understand specific vulnerabilities and contributions of men and women. Third, sometimes gender is a little sidelined, so integrating gender considerations across all aspects of climate policy and planning is critical. And lastly, investing in capacity building programs to enhance knowledge not only of policymakers and CSOs, but for everyone on gender and climate change is really critical. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. And NDC, as mentioned before, should allocate sufficient funds for gender responsive climate actions, covering capacity building, technology transfer, and adaptation. And as mentioned before, promoting gender balance and inclusivity in decision making, really making sure that all the diverse perspectives are considered is important. And lastly, robust mechanisms should be developed to track gender integration within NDCs, ensuring transparency and accountability. Sorry. Last slide, please.
الشفافية والوضوح.
So no, I know this has been like a lot of information and snapshots, so I pasted my email on the screen because unfortunately I couldn't be there in person, but happy to respond any additional questions. Thank you.
If you're hearing us, Jasmine, we're applauding you. Thank you so much for this.
I can't hear you, but good to know. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I think one of the first very visible things are the very positive indicators of the progress of integration of gender in NDCs from 2015 until now. I think the progress is promising. That, I think, means that there are more capacities in understanding what this mainstreaming is and how useful it is for the implementation of the NDCs. But we also do know these challenges, and of course, all of this is an iterative process, including non-party stakeholder and policy-making, climate commitments is an iterative methodology. But it seems that we are going in the right direction in the region, at least. It's very encouraging to see also those mentions of gender and women in the different NDCs in the region. So thank you so much, Jasmine. I would now like to turn to Jen from the Climate Champions to talk about the same perspective from not only private sector, maybe all non-party stakeholders, but if you could also focus on how can the private sector engage in the NDC and how can governments enhance how they include also the private sector. So what does the NDC mean for companies? Over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to our hosts and to fellow panelists. And yeah, really interesting and promising, as you said, to see those gender statistics and already some good progress on that front. A pleasure to be here on this well-gendered panel as well. So I'm Jen Austin. I'm with the Climate Champions team, meaning that I work for the high-level champions for climate action. And just briefly what that is, and then I'll talk about the businesses in the NDCs. So each year, the country that's hosting the COP appoints someone to be the high-level champion for climate action. This year for COP28, it's Her Excellency Rassan Al Mubarak. Last year for COP27, it was Dr. Mahmoud Mohiuddin. And so that position was actually created from this very same insight of created in Paris once the Paris Agreement, or as the Paris Agreement was being decided and concluded. It was realized then that as we move into a phase of implementation, the negotiations are important and the intergovernmental process is super important. And in order to move forward with implementation and achievement of all of the goals that have been set, that we need a whole of society approach. And so that is at the core of the Climate Champions' work, and their mandate is to work with non-party stakeholders, which again in UN language means not the governments, or not the national governments, as the city governments mentioned earlier. They are governments, but considered non-party stakeholders in this case. And so that means businesses of all sizes, cities, states, regions, investors, civil society, youth, indigenous peoples, academics, sort of the whole spectrum of folks who are out there in the real world working to get these things done. And so as we're talking about, first of all, why, well, so we work with those full range of actors. Because of who I'm joined with on this panel, I was asked to speak a bit more about the business perspective. And so first of all, why do businesses care about NDCs? What are NDCs and what would they mean to a business? Meaning, why would they be motivated to be involved? And for one, the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, are the targets that countries put forward. And as the name implies, the countries get to determine for themselves what those are going to look like and what they're going to include. And so from a business point of view, there's a real opportunity to help inform what it is that would be useful for you as a business to help you make better decisions, to help you know which way things are going to be going. And that essentially, there's a lot of, as we're working to achieve our 2050 goals and our goals this decade, there's huge amounts of action that need to be taken by a whole variety of actors, whether you're going to be buying zero carbon products or producing zero carbon products or investing in zero carbon products or utilizing them at home or using them in your school or in your house or in your car. And right now we're at a place where we don't have everything that we need. When you go to the store, you don't see enough zero carbon products, and when people are making investments, they're not sure which to invest in. And so basically the more clarity there is about where we need to go collectively, not only to net zero by 2050, but what does that mean this decade in different sectors, and what are the different specifics for a business or a financier? The more specificity there is about that direction of travel and some of the steps along the way, the more confidence that they have and the more ability that they have then to plan in an ambitious and forward-looking way. We talk a lot about the ambition loop and how leadership by businesses and the private sector and non-state actors across the board can help inform and inspire higher ambition action by their peers and by the governments, local and otherwise, where they are working, and then how strong, clear policies give the clarity and confidence to the market, essentially, and society as to which way they're going. And so at its core, that's what these NDCs have the opportunity to be, with more clarity and detail, and so clarity of strong, ambitious targets across the economy, and then, where possible, specificity as to what that looks like. As we talk about growing momentum in the climate movement, and there is with a lot of leadership from businesses and investors in cities and states, people are asking those businesses for clear transition plans and how are you going to achieve those targets. And investors are asking that of the businesses they work in. Businesses are asking that of their supply chains. Cities are asking that of the businesses that are in their cities. And equally, this next round of NDCs could quite helpfully have quite as much of that information as possible to help set the direction of travel. So then to the question of how and why might businesses engage. So quite obviously, businesses have significant influence in society, in the economy, and in the governmental process. And exactly what that looks like in different parts of the world, what those engagement sort of opportunities are, and how it's structured looks different. And as the previous panel discussed, including in the Q&A, that needs to look different in different places to make sure that people have the information and capacity and right sort of setting to engage. But definitely across the board, there's a role for businesses, large and small, to sort of demonstrate what is possible and to bring their innovations, to bring their insights, to offer solutions, to offer partnership and collaboration to the process and in terms of the specific solutions. There's also a real opportunity to work together to do that, sometimes with others in your sector and sometimes cross-sectoral. We know we need to work on climate sort of in every corner of society and economy right now. That can be a lot to take on alone, but when working together, you can do more, including with the governmental entities. And so there's lots of ways that businesses can bring that influence and insight. I think I would say one important first step is to go ahead and take some action yourself as a business. Take that action, be clear about what you're doing with your own climate action, talk about why you're doing that, what motivates you as a business. That helps other people understand both the opportunities that you're pursuing as a business, maybe some of the risks you're managing by building resilience or reducing emissions within your own operations, and then talk about the challenges along the way, but the benefits that you're seeing. Because again, that's what helps inform others, both in society, but also in governments, to understand what it is that is helpful and what the benefits are.
then it's really tactical. So what does it really mean to engage with the government? Again, that will look different in different places, but for this process of NDCs, one, it's useful to bring some suggestions on what that process should look like. Do you want a meeting? Do you want a survey? Do you want to come in for a consultation? Do you want to bring government officials out to your facilities to show them some of what you're doing? I think all of those could be useful, and so making some suggestions now about what that process would look like and what it is that you could offer, and then sharing those suggestions on the substance. And whether that's in writing or in meetings, whether that's publicly or privately, I would sort of recommend all of the above and thinking about how to do that in a space that allows for some discussion, for some collaboration, and for some questions and answers. Very importantly for businesses, I would say, is that they're consistent in that input and influence. And whether it's a big multinational business, whether it's a locally headquartered business, whether it's a smaller business in the supply chain, making sure that businesses realize they have an influence through, yes, what they say to governments, but also what they do, what they are sharing in their products, what they're sharing in their commercials. There's many avenues of influence, and often many offices here and there, and so making sure that everyone is internally in the company singing from the same song sheet, saying the same things, and being really consistent as the climate journey. It's changing and it's always new, and there's some complexity there, so there's work to be done inside the business to make sure people are on the same page. Lastly, I would say, do work with others. It is hard to go this alone, and there is a growing community of businesses, investors, cities, states, regions, civil society who are starting to march together on climate solutions. With the Climate Champions work, we work around the world with partners through 2 umbrella campaigns. One is called the Race to Zero, one is called the Race to Resilience. Those bring together initiatives from around the world, across sectors, across stakeholders, who are committed to high levels of ambition, to being public about those commitments, to reporting back on progress, and to working together as a community to make progress. So we welcome people to join those, we encourage people to join those, and that sort of network and benefit comes from being there. And the last one I'll mention, because it's here in the region, is just last week with the COP presidency, the SME Climate Hub, Small and Medium Enterprise Climate Hub, launched a MENA branch. And so for the first time, that means that there will be multilingual support and resources, meaning there'll be a real focus in the region on recruitment and engagement and encouragement of working, especially with some of those smaller and medium-sized enterprises. Make sure that there's tools and resources for target setting, for measuring and reporting of progress, and a forum to bring together some of that leadership. And so, obviously, with COP28 coming soon in the region, looking forward to really engaging with businesses to join those campaigns and to get going on their climate journeys, and then really importantly to be a part of that group that is engaging with governments, offering that input, support, insights, and collaboration over the next year and a half as NDCs are getting updated.
Thank you so much, Dan. I think there's a lot of good points, I think, that I want to highlight. The element of clarity for businesses, importance of the granularity in NDCs and how that signals how the private sector should plan, because they are involved in all aspects of the policy planning up to 2030 and beyond. But also the element of, you alluded to a point where it might seem like a big task to do this. And it does say non-party stakeholders. We're trying to tackle all the elements here in this panel, but in the end, and from the previous panel as well, we've noticed it is down to that community, that company, and that city. When we go down to that level of understanding and engagement, it becomes less and less cumbersome if everybody understands their role and how they're engaging with their governments to advance this. And on that, I want to touch on the citizen point and move to Harika, who is going to provide some guidance from the World Bank on the engagement of citizens and the whole of society approach. So I want to turn to Harika. Can you hear us?
Hi, good afternoon, good morning. Yes, I can hear you. Thanks. So I would be happy to dive right in. But if possible, would it be okay to share my screen, or would you guys prefer to pull up the presentation?
Thanks, Harika. I believe we have your slides. If we can kindly put them up on the screen, it would be great.
Thank you. Thank you. So so while the slides are being put up, allow me to start. I think what we're all hearing today is is very conducive and is very encouraging, for the participation of non-party stakeholders in the NDC planning and implementation. As a part of this initiative, the World Bank team actually prepared a citizen climate action framework for the Middle East and North Africa region. And today, I think I would just like to take the opportunity, not to so much, dive into the details of this framework, but maybe to reinforce some of the key messages that were raised in the earlier panel, but to also, maybe raise a few questions for us to think about and to ponder over as we proceed. So next slide, please. So I think, just to make the point here that, when we talk about a whole of society approach to climate change action, I think that we as a community and that we all of us as a group, need to be aware of what and how, and we need to have a little bit of clarity here. And because there's a multiplicity of actors involved, I'm also getting the sense that that's not always particularly clear. So when we say what, and who, I think it's important to take into account that, yes, we have various non-state actors involved. We have subnational governments, we have civil society, but we also have citizens, and very importantly, we also have the most vulnerable groups which are most impacted by climate change, which include fishing communities, which include agricultural communities, and really the most vulnerable of the vulnerable who cannot always have the opportunity to represent themselves effectively. So I think that we just need to be cognizant of that as we move forward and we think about the next round of the NDC planning and implementation. Next slide, please. Also, to make the point here that I think what you've heard today is that the transparency aspect is extremely important. Capacity building, education, and awareness raising is also important. And very hearteningly, I also noted that there was a lot of emphasis on participation. But I think, again, we as a community and as a group of practitioners, also need to tease out a little bit, or to unpack what that participation is going to look like, depending on the context and depending on the role that each of us is playing, in this arena as a constituency. Next slide, please. So I think all of you, who are present there are far more aware of the challenges. But basically, the point over here is to say that a more systematic approach is needed, to be able to implement the engagement of citizens and to adopt a whole of society approach. Next slide. So moving forward, I think it's important for us to think strategically and structurally about what exactly a whole society approach citizen climate action would entail. I think ever since I've started working on this topic, that is something which I hear quite a lot from various stakeholders, that we need to all join hands, we need to do this collectively. But what I think the World Bank team has tried to do, and which you also wanted to share for your consideration and to add to the dialogue, is what exactly would whole of society approach would look like. And here I would like to emphasize that it would mobilize all actors and resources in collective action, which I think we all agree on. I also heard quite a lot about empowering communities and households to take direct action in the previous panel, as well as the current panel. I think it's also important to drive home the point that collective action would also empower citizens to hold governments to account for efficiency and performance. on NDC planning as well as implementation. I think that the trust and accountability side is also as important as taking direct action and fostering collaborative partnerships. Next slide, please. And so here, I think when we say what do we mean, by whole of society approach to citizen climate action, some key principles which I think would be important to abide by or to think through as we go into the next round of the NDCs is to focus citizen and civil society action on formal national processes and establish a continuous cycle of engagement. I think what we've seen from the previous NDCs is that there's a lot of emphasis on consultation and engagement with various stakeholder groups, including youth, and gender representatives, etc., during the planning stage, but perhaps not so much as during implementation and as part of the monitoring, and that could be potentially something to think about. I think one of the other speakers also mentioned ensuring that processes are empowering and not tokenistic. And I think again somebody else also mentioned earlier that the top down and the bottom up actions need to complement each other. Next slide, please. I think we can move to the next slide to talk a little bit about what exactly would be a whole of society approach. Yes. So here again, we want to present for your consideration on what a whole of society approach could potentially look like as we think about a more systematic approach to non-party stakeholder engagement. So we divided this into three pillars. The first pillar is on accountability, which focuses on the interaction between governments and citizens, and really giving citizens and civil society the platform to be able to hold governments accountable for their performance on the NDC implementation. And this could be at the national level as well as the subnational level. The second pillar is focusing far more on collaborative action, where citizens and civil society organizations engage in government processes, which also attest to the importance of institutionalizing such processes and having them on an ongoing basis to be able to acquire citizen feedback, inputs, and collaborative efforts to take climate change action. And the third pillar focuses on direct action, which mobilizes communities, which fosters on a continuous basis behavior change, which starts taking into account what local actors or city level or rural level actors could what actions they could take on a community-based level, on a collective level, as well as an individual level to be able to contribute to climate change action. And at the center of it all of this hinges upon transparency and access to information, not only on the impact of climate change, which I think all of us are very aware of at this point, but also on what are the avenues to be able to participate in climate change action, and what are some of the ways in which some sort of accountability can also be built into these processes to be able to hold various actors to account for their climate change actions. So again, I think in the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail, but let me skip to the next slide, please. So here we've also tried to identify or spell out in a little bit more detail what is business as usual in the sort of current focus on NDC implementation, and what could potentially a change or adopting strategic framework for
التكيف
non-party
في
stakeholder engagement look like.
مع
So,
هذه
what a whole of
الشراكات
society approach would look like
ما
would
الذي
be for
تفعله في
global
هذه
watchdogs to include countries Middle East and North Africa in their data
المجتمعات
sets
في
and to build
أفريقيا
collaborations with
وأيضا
national partners to enhance national voice.
نبني الشراكات
There could also be
التي
options
تكون
explored
مع
to focus on local monitoring initiatives
تحدد
to engage with youth in tracking climate
المبادرات
benefits as well as
متغيرة
performance. Next
في
slide, please.
التي سأذكرها في الشريحة الثانية.
So this slide focuses on the
وهذه الشريحة
collaborative actions, and again
تركز
just to give you a
على
couple of examples, we
الشراكات
have business as
أعمال
usual,
الشراكات
but then
وهي
what we could also
أو
have
التعاون
in terms of thinking
كما
about the
ترون
whole
هنالك
society approach is for global think tanks to build collaborations
أن يكون
with
هنالك
national
تعاون
partners in the Middle East and North Africa
أيضا
working on climate change action.
تعاون
I think very
وطني
importantly
تعاون
at the national
مدني
level for
في
ministries
أن
and
تكون
for e-government
في
stakeholders to
التعاون
establish
المدني هو
participatory
أن تكون
policy making
هنالك
and planning platforms for civil society
الوزارات
actors.
أن تعطي بعضا من اتخاذ القرارات والتخطيط منصات محددة معينة لهذا التخطيط واتخاذ القرار للمجتمعات أو قطاعات المجتمعات الوطنية في أن تكون هناك استراتيجيات مع المشاكل وأيضا
This last slide focuses on direct action, again business as usual and what the whole of society approach would look like. Here again we have examples such as where behavior change programs could be established with key sectors to have an impact on sector targets for
أعمال مباشرة
NDCs,
محددة
and have greater youth engagement, for instance, in green social enterprises. Especially in challenging economic let me end here.
دعوني أتوقف هنا
which has my contact information.
هذه هي معلومات التواصل
معي. A lot of information for all of you, but really
هذه
if
معلومات
there's
التواصل
one takeaway that I would like you all to have today from this intervention is that I think all of us are very keen and I think all of us are convinced about the importance and the relevance of adopting a whole of society approach. I think that the next step for us to make some headway on this is to just be
أو تكون شاملة لجميع المجتمع أن يشاركوا في اتخاذ القرارات ويكون هناك استراتيجيات معينة لكيف نحن ولكن مشكلتنا هنا كيف سنفعلها وأيضا كيف سنقوم بتطبيقها بالمستوى الوطني أو أيضا المستوى المحلي أو المستوى العالمي. شكرا لكم لإعطائي فرصة
للتحدث. Thank you so much, Malika. This was highly useful. Based on your presentation and also what we've already heard from this panel is that these guidances kind of frame what this engagement and this mobilization of non-party stakeholder could look like, and that is the point. There are a lot of non-party stakeholder groups that sometimes don't know where to start, specifically if their government have not started to engage them. And these different elements are very useful for people to consult, to understand how they can engage. It takes different forms. In the previous panel, this was said as well. It can be a consultation, it can be involving an institutional setup, it could be doing your own homework, and it could be programs. So these set of collective guidances from the international development community is really super helpful to guide, and it's an iterative process. Good practices inform those guidances, and then those guidances make sure that the whole of society approach to implement NDCs is further advanced. Thank you so much, Harika. I would now like to give the floor to our last speaker, last but not least, Leah from UN Habitat. So we've heard from Ikle on the previous panel on some elements in engaging cities in climate action and development planning in NDCs. What is something that municipalities can go to? What could be some guidance that they can use, and what has been some best practices that you have
ما
seen
هي
in the
أفضل
region?
الممارسات التي رأيتيها في هذه المنطقة؟
Thank you so much, Mary, for the question.
شكرا
Also,
لك على
thanks
هذا
to all the
السؤال.
panelists before me. It's always tough to be the last one and then try to add to that conversation. Maybe let me just briefly share one anecdote to start with. A couple months ago, I was at a conference and somebody came, said, look, question, I'm really new to this climate space. why do we even need cities in the NDCs, and why do we need non-party stakeholders in the NDCs? And what happened was a fantastic discussion. And what we came up with collectively, it's a tough question actually to give a really short answer to. It gives us the opportunity to come back home and have a hook that all of these stakeholders then can use and say, but you, dear government, said in your NDC that you will build on cities, on businesses, on youth,
أن
on
يكون
women,
الفرصة للمدن وأيضا المجتمعات أن تعرف ما هي المساهمات الحكومية التي ممكن أن تساعدهم، ونحتاج لهذه النقطة المهمة أن يكون هنالك الكثير من لابد أن يكون صاحب المصلحة صاحب المصلحة غير الأطراف أن يكونوا جزء من هذه المساهمات المحددة وطنية.
We're hearing you fine.
Yeah, you hear me fine? We cannot get there alone. The climate crisis is not one thing where just one entity can tackle it by itself. We really need a whole of society and an inclusive approach. So now to come back to your question with that little detour is, if we look at the urban content of the NDCs, and Leon already alluded to that briefly. I am getting my microphone fixed. I moved too violently before, apparently. Thank you. Currently, around two-thirds of the NDCs have urban content. So I was really jealous when I saw Jasmine's slide and really impressed of the massive increase of gender equality and women in the NDCs between the revision cycles. And that's actually my inspiration for the next revision cycle to have that same increase and also be at 95% of the NDCs with urban content. So around two-thirds right now have urban content, but not all of them have strong urban content. It's around, 47 NDCs have strong urban content, and then 76 have moderate urban content. That's not really good enough. If we consider that cities are responsible for around 70% of the emissions, but also actually are responsible for 80% of the GDP. So lots of the money is sitting in cities, and lots of the emissions are sitting in cities. So we need to get cities to be a strong partner and to help us tackle the climate crisis and bring them to the entire conversation. And to share some examples from this region, like Leon, I had a look at what the recent publications UN Habitat published a report with an analysis of the urban content of the NDCs earlier this year, where this data that I just shared comes from, and some examples of strong urban content is Bahrain, it's Jordan, it's Lebanon, and it's also Saudi Arabia. So there's more examples from the region, but just to give you 4 right now. And then to maybe share one other thing that I thought was really surprising, and that also comes from that same report, is actually hazards at the local level, at the urban level. Very few NDCs talk about the impacts of climate change and the hazards that cities are experiencing. And if we're seeing what's happening in the news, we've seen the floods, we see the flash floods, we see the droughts. I think somebody before talked about the urban heat effect, that cities are up to 10 degrees hotter than their rural surroundings. And of course also the sea level rise that will hit our cities, because 90% of cities are along coastlines or water bodies. So these are really impacts of climate change that cities are already experiencing. And to throw in another number, 70% of cities are already feeling the impact of climate change today. So we can see that that number will increase as the impact of climate change, of course, also expected to increase. So what are some recommendations? First of all, engage a wide range of stakeholders in your NDC planning. I like what Haya said in the beginning, that youth was invited to the kitchen in the UAE. We need to make sure that this kitchen is big enough to invite a lot of different stakeholders. There is a saying, you know, too many cooks in the kitchen, but in the end, we all need to eat the same soup. I mean, climate change is impacting all of us, so we need to make sure that we have all of these stakeholders in the kitchen, all levels of governments, but also, of course, other non-party stakeholders, that it's a transparent, fair process. And that it's not only you know, a process that's a one-off thing, but a process that continues in the different revision cycles, that has different you know, stop points of saying, okay, this is where we are, this is where we need to be. And then as a second big recommendation is, look what your cities are already doing in your country. Many local governments are much more ambitious than their national governments. And it's not to play, you know, levels of governments against each other. It's saying there's an opportunity that we can build on to collectively help us tackle the climate crisis. So see what are existing policies, what are existing action plans, targets, and then see how you can build on that to help integrate all of this in the NDCs. And then as a last thing, and we've talked about this already a little bit before, local governments can do a lot of things, and they've already done a lot of things, but often they lack the technical or the human resources to get it done. Innovations are often not reaching the local level, and the big thing is money. And I'm happy that we have somebody from the bank here, from the World Bank. So this is a message that, you know, needs to be heard really loud and clear by everybody. Is local governments can do a lot of things, but only 10% of the finance needs actually reach the local governments right now. So we need to find mechanisms to get more money to the local level and build on them to accelerate urban climate change mitigation, adaptation in an integrated manner to really build that urban resilience and really build sustainable, healthy and better places to live. Most of us live in cities, so we can really, you know, we know what it feels like to live in a green city, and if we can have that vision in our heads, that can really help us get there. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Leah. In this process, we always somehow go into a metaphor discussion, and now we have a kitchen with tools and different people in it and how big it is. So I think it's a very nice way to portray this process. And again, I love the point that you made on adaptation and disasters and understanding the impacts of cities. I believe the large majority of NDCs from the region include a large adaptation component, and disaster risk is starting to being mainstream and elevated to the levels of NDC to really signal to the world that this is a huge priority. So it's easy in different discussions, in different events, in different documents to silo all of these elements, but in the end, it's a very integrated approach. And capacity to be that integrated and to be that comprehensive is needed. It's not easy to plan this out over the different non-party stakeholders and the different documents and the different policies that need to be designed. The point of this panel really is to be very forward-looking. So you have given us really examples from the region, different recommendations, different priorities, have gone through some challenges. And I believe what we want to leave this panel or this event with is there are guidances out there, there are initiatives out there, there are examples out there. The world is not where it was 10 years ago. Non-party stakeholders are much more, have their capacities more built, no matter where they are. And this is a region which has started to feel that across the different elements. So the international development community is looking at this and is providing conduits and avenues to guide the different non-party stakeholder groups to find where they can to go where they can find something they can use. If they can go to their governments, but also be more informed themselves. This is no longer a top-down approach. This is an everybody needs to do their homework approach, which is really great. So before closing, I do want to give the floor to each one of you again, maybe some reflections from the whole event, and what would you leave participants here and online with, maybe what to do till COP, and maybe what to do till next round of NDCs specifically. I can start with Jasmine, if you are still with us.
اجتماع الأطراف القادم في 2028. لنبدأ مع جاسمين.
Jasmine, can you hear us?
هل يمكنك سماعنا؟
Okay, maybe some technical difficulties there. Jen, please, over to you.
Sure, thanks. Well, thanks for having me on the panel, and really appreciate the other panelists' comments as well. I mean, I think looking forward, the things I would say, and mentioning some resources, you know, I think whether you're a city, business, large or small, my encouragement would be to take action, set a bold target, begin working on it, be vocal about what it is that you're doing, report back on that progress, and reach out to your peers and your government and start to have this conversation. The sooner the better, because now is the time to think about how to base shape that engagement, and then use the time ahead to, you know, to actually then do that engagement and dive in on different topics, including across multi-stakeholders. Would encourage across all of these topics in terms of resources. You know, there's the city's race to zero, there's the city's race to resilience. Many of the cities you're talking about are in those campaigns, and as you said, therefore often reducing emissions faster than the areas around them, providing that example and inspiration for what others can do. Same on the business side. The MENA Small and Medium Enterprise Climate Hub is up and running, so we welcome people to check that out. The broader Race to Zero is available for people anywhere. There's a handbook as part of Race to Zero with respect to persuasion that actually lays out some both content and some of the tactical recommendations for non-state actors of all types, including businesses, but others, to think about how to engage and how to start to pull together some of their own thoughts on what would be best to see in there. So welcome everybody to check out those resources. And again, really hope to see a lot of this leadership and enthusiasm and insights on stage in Dubai at COP28 quite soon.
هذا الحماس والقيادة التي رأيتها اليوم
we will show a QR code on the screen with all the guidances that have been mentioned during this last panel, which you can all access, which is useful. So I would like now to give the floor to Harika while people are scanning this QR code.
يمكنكم مسح الQR code على الشاشة.
Harika, can you hear us for a last key message? Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you so much again for all of the participants. Great insights, and for having this opportunity. I think there are a couple of takeaways that I would like to recommend, you know, in terms of forward-looking next steps. I think that the first one in the lead up to COP28 is to really take a serious look at, you know, what are some of the good practices out there, especially in the MENA region when it comes to non-party stakeholder engagement. I think not only does looking at other examples and pilots and other successful initiatives, you know, serve as a blueprint, but honestly, I mean, given the complex and the multifaceted nature of this challenge that we are dealing with, I think all of us around the table need a boost. And I think it's like, you know, important to like cheer each other on and to learn from each other. But again,
نتعلم من بعضنا البعض وأيضا أن يكون هنالك نظام واضح وقواعد معينة وتكون متشابهة معا ليمكننا العمل والتحالف مع بعضنا البعض من مؤسساتنا وأيضا بعد
as I think was mentioned earlier,
كما قال
it is important to continue to work with our governments, you know, on the
مهم
NDC
جدا العمل مع الجهات
implementation.
الحكومية.
But I would urge that we think about this in a very strategic, way where there is an actual plan to be able to do this. So, for the planning of the NDCs and for the implementation of the NDCs, there should be an overall plan for a whole of society approach, and there should be, to the extent possible, sectoral plans to be able to achieve this as well. Including national adaptation plans, including plans which focus on specific sectors such as health or education. I think without this kind of top-down systematic approach, it is going to be difficult to harness the whole of society to be able to make some impact. And then, of course, in parallel, continue with our collaborative and direct action efforts, but also to the extent possible, not make them ad hoc, and maybe try and pitch in more, or to the extent possible in climate change networks and multi-stakeholder platforms and multi-stakeholder climate change networks, where again we can bring different types of skills and knowledge and resources to the table, and to be able to mobilize collectively as different stakeholders to achieve climate targets. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Harika. Thanks so much for this. I understand Jasmine is back on. Jasmine, if you can give one quick key message reflecting on the discussion here.
Thank you so much, and you can hear me now. I wanted to say as a last message that we need more women's leadership and support women's participation and decision-making from women's and on-the-ground grassroots organizations. And what we've seen is that when we involve women in NDC processes, they become more inclusive. So really, we cannot achieve any long-term climate solution without pushing for gender equality and women's empowerment and leadership. And yes, and also UNDP has developed some specific knowledge products and tools on how to better engage non-party stakeholders and also women's groups. So I believe those has already been shared.
صاحب المصلحة
and thank you so much
في هذه المجالات
وأشكركم. Has been a pleasure to
لقد
be here.
إنه لشرف لي
Likewise, thank you, Jasmine.
أن
And
أتواجد في هذا
last but not
الجلسة.
least, your concluding remarks.
Thank you. Let me stay with the kitchen comparison because I think it's also lunchtime. Maybe that's where the inspiration comes from. 4 points. 1, build a big enough kitchen so everybody has space. 2,
نقطتي
see the
المهمة
many
هي
cooks
بناء
as an opportunity to get the
مطابخ
job
أكبر
done.
اللي
And
تروا
really, you need many
طبخات
cooks to
أكبر
cook a large meal. So see that as
لأنكم
an
تحتاجون
opportunity to get
طباخون
the job
كثيرون
done. I do want to say that last year,
للحصول
COP27
على وجبات
in
أكبر
Habitat with ICLEI and the COP27 presidency launched an initiative, the Surge Initiative, as an opportunity to have many cooks in the kitchen and to really see and think about how to have that conversation between and that narrative between local, national, and global discourse. Then 3, third point, make sure that you invite all stakeholders back to your kitchen and have that transparent process, have that feedback
تدعو
process.
جميع
And then the
صاحبو
fourth point,
المصلحة
a big global kitchen event is of course
في
coming up. That's
مطابخكم
COP28.
واجتماع الأطراف القادم في
Ministerial meeting on urbanization and
2028
climate change coming
هو
up.
جدا
That's co-hosted by the
قادم
COP28 presidency, UN Habitat, and the UN
وسيكون
climate change champions. So really excited about that event.
يتطرق
What we will be
لمواضيع
discussing
التغير
there is
المناخي
we
وسوف
need cities
نتحدث
to
عن
have achieved
كما
again
قلنا
the
نود
targets of the
الكثير
Paris
من
Agreement
المدن
and what do we need to do in order to get money and to the
الذي
local
يجب
level.
فعله
So looking forward to seeing
للحصول
all
على
of you in
التمويل
Dubai there.
على الصعيد
That's very promising. Thank you so much,
الوطني.
Leia. I would like to give the last
أود أن
speaking opportunity to Rafif to give us some
أود أن أعطي
inspiration
رفيق
in closing this whole event and
فرصة
sharing your wisdom. I just want to also say
عن
today I'm very happy that this is going to the highest levels in terms of non-party stakeholder
ختام
engagement in climate
بعض
action
المرئيات
and getting a lot of
الختامية
visibility at COP. So this is very encouraging. Over to you, Rafif.
تفضلي رفيق.
Hello? Maybe not. Ah, there we go. Okay. Well, first, I don't think I can say anything more than what the panelists and all the speakers have said. One of the things that kept coming to mind was blueprint, and Harika already mentioned it. Or to, I mean, I think what's very important, what we've heard today is from people on the ground or in the kitchen, that there's a blueprint for how we can move forward. There's a clear direction where we need to go, and I think it'd be just important to kind of highlight those again and go over the tools that I think they've given today that many of us can employ going forward. And I encourage everyone to scan the QR code. But I think it became clear how important networking is, and I think this event kind of demonstrates that everyone needs to be discussing this. This needs to be discussed not at only at the national level, but in the local communities. So beyond just our conferences, how do we get the discussion going? And it's great to see youth are doing it, reaching out through different angles and segments in society. But what's really important also is that we have to institutionalize this dialogue. That this can't be just a token or just inviting people for participation to say that it's been done. They really, and we've seen examples how with each iteration of the NDCs, more is being included, more voices are being included, whether it's through the community, through youth, through gender, but there's still a ways to go. That's clearly obvious that, as was highlighted, cities still have a big role to play, and also it's not consistent across all our region within MENA, and also not across all the cities. We heard from first, let's say, leading cities to secondary cities, but also across the different countries. So some have already taken quite a bit of initiative, and that's been highlighted today, so I encourage the other countries to get involved in the discussion and see what we can learn from each other. One of the main points that kept coming out is clearly information is important, and that's why the work that's been each community has been doing is key to taking this forward, but we need more on data, more on whether it's disaggregated by gender, by youth, by understanding the private sector more, understanding the financing institutions, because they play a big role, and even the role of the MDBs. So we need more analysis to kind of inform our discussion. And I think what's become quite clear, and I think everyone has highlighted how important stakeholder mapping is, or, everyone calls it by their own term, but really kind of understanding all the different segments of society and how they can be involved. Whether, and a number of tools have been shared with us, whether it's through awareness building or forums that can be done at the community level, online, with universities. But basically, it's also important to tailor it to the segment that you're trying to target, to ensure that you're bringing them in its avenues to hear from them. And it's tailored to, whether that local community, what approach best suits them to get them involved. Whether it's through the business community or, as we already mentioned, one example was at the local mosque. There's different opportunities, so let's keep that in mind. And I think, as Harika said, let's ensure that this is a blueprint. This isn't just recommendations, but how do we institutionalize and ensure that this is a system that's put in place for the NDCs going forward. And I think all the panelists here are already driving that initiative forward, and looking forward to having this discussion elevated at
Thank you so much, Rafiq. I want to invite everyone to applaud our excellent panel and event. So thank you so much.